Let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're taking a quiet, seemingly simple moment from a backyard garden and blowing it up into a really fascinating micro to macro botanical journey. We're going to be looking at some incredibly observant garden notes from an author named Ang, who carefully documented the life cycle of the sesame plant. We're starting with the tiny, fuzzy details and scaling all the way up to a fundamental question about how we interact with nature itself.
Okay, let's set the scene exactly where our story kicks off. Ang writes, since the sesame, or sesamum-indicum, plants have been thriving during this raining season, we're seeing capsules forming now that the flowers have faded. Just picture that lush, rainy season setting for a second. The heavy rains have totally done their job, those beautiful flowers have had their moment in the sun, and as they naturally fade away, they make room for some seriously exciting new growth. It's that perfect transition point in the garden.
All right, let's get into it. Section 1, Anatomy of the Capsule. Before we get too far into the weeds here, let's define what we're actually looking at. A capsule is simply the seed pod of the sesame plant. Think of it as this protective botanical nursery where the tiny seeds actively grow. It is absolutely crucial. It's the main vessel of the entire plant.
Ang notes some highly specific physical traits of these capsules, and they're really quite unique. If you look closely, they have this distinct fuzzy texture on the outside. They're oblong in shape, and here's the coolest part. They grow pointing straight upwards, emerging directly from the leaf axils. Take a second to mentally visualize that. A slightly fuzzy, elongated pod reaching vertically upright from where the leaf meets the stem. It's a very specific, almost tactile detail that just goes to show the deep level of observation in these notes.
Moving right along to Section 2, the maturation process.
So how does this actually play out? Here's the exact biological sequence. First, the beautiful flowers fade, making way for those fuzzy, upward-pointing pods we just talked about. Then begins what Ang calls a waiting game. We basically just wait for those green pods to eventually turn brown as they mature. And finally, the pods naturally split open, an action that's actually known as shattering. It's this brilliant, step-by-step progression from a delicate flower to a really dramatic mechanical opening.
As we think about that final stage, the pod splitting open, I want to pause and pose the author's exact sense of wonder right back to you. Ang writes, I can't help but wonder just how many seeds we'll find in a single capsule, especially considering how tiny the seeds are. It really pulls you in, doesn't it? Inside that fuzzy, brown splitting pod is this hidden mystery, just a sheer volume of microscopic seeds waiting to be revealed.
Which brings us to a really interesting crossroads. Section 3, 2 approaches to harvesting.
To really grasp this dilemma, we have to look closer at that word, shattering. This is when the mature capsules naturally split open and rapidly scatter their seeds everywhere. This inevitable, natural scattering is the driving force behind the entire harvesting challenge for literally anyone growing sesame.
Because these capsules shatter the very moment they mature, we're left with a massive dichotomy. On one hand, we have the farmer's method, which relies on strict intervention. On the other, we have the gardener's method, relying entirely on natural progression. Basically, how do we respond to the plant's built-in urge to just let go and shatter?
Let's look at the farmer's preventative intervention first. Commercial farmers absolutely cannot afford to let their yield literally scatter into the wind, right? So they have to act preemptively. They watch closely and wait just until the bottom pods turn brown. The literal minute that happens, they cut the entire stalk down. Then they tie those stalks into upright bundles to dry safely. They are aggressively intervening in the plant's life cycle to completely prevent the natural shattering process and secure the crop.
Now, faced with this same reality, Ang makes a totally deliberate, mindful choice. Rather than aggressive intervention, Ang simply states they are taking the opposite approach in their own garden. They are consciously choosing to reject that strict agricultural playbook. So what does that opposite approach actually look like? Well, it means adopting a strictly hands-off philosophy. And Gaux lets nature take its course. They allow the mature pods to shatter entirely on their own schedule. By taking a step back and basically doing nothing, they let the plants naturally scatter their tiny seeds to the ground. This actively reseeds the area, fueling the cycle for the very next rainy season. It's a cycle of trust, really, rather than a cycle of control.
So, what started as a simple, quiet garden observation actually leaves us with a pretty profound philosophical choice. When faced with the natural shattering of the sesame pod, what would your approach be? We're going to leave you with this provocative final thought. Will you intervene to control the harvest, bundling it up before it can scatter, or will you let nature take its course and reseed for the future? Thanks so much for exploring the incredible life cycle of the sesame plant with me today. I really hope this explainer leaves you looking at your own garden and the natural systems all around us just a little bit differently.